Well, a very good evening to you, and thank you so much for making time to join us for this edition of Spectrum. We are coming to you live on Radio 1 FM 90, but also via our website, which is www.radio1fm90.com. On that website, there is an icon with the word Listen Live. You click on it, you'll be able to listen to this radio station. We're also live on the different radio listening apps, which can be obtained from the Google Store of your smartphone. You download any, look for Radio 1 FM 90, and as long as you have an internet connection, you should be able to listen to us from anywhere across the globe. We also have the option of DSTV. If you have a DSTV connection, you look for audio channel 897. Now, there are two ways to contribute to this discussion. One of the ways is actually to call in. Time allowing, I'll open the phone lines for you to do so. But the other easiest way is actually to send us message via the WhatsApp line, 0703-090-090. Today, we'll be looking at the persistent calls for national dialogue. What lessons can we take from Kenya and Tanzania? Now, we know Uganda has had some ups and downs, especially on the side of governance, and many political observers have insisted that if we are not careful, the past may catch up with us. And this, they say, requires a national dialogue to address the fault lines. Now, we know our neighbors, Kenya, they have always chosen the path of dialogue to resolve their differences. And what we have seen from there is progressive electoral and political reforms. Now, in the wake of the recent protests over the finance bill, the Kenyan government has initiated a 6-day national dialogue to address the economic challenges the country faces. Not so long ago, we saw the Tanzanian government reaching out to the opposition for discussions, and we have seen political reforms occurring there, including lifting of the ban on opposition rallies. Now, in Uganda, there's always been talk about dialogue, especially after elections. There's been an attempt through the Elders Forum, iPod, but there seems to be no commitment. And we have seen the opposition saying that the agenda has always never been clear. Now, due to many emerging challenges, and as we also prepare for the 2026 general elections, now the proponents of national dialogue say that there is need to have a new consensus, including a new constitution, political and electoral reforms. We also need to have a discussion about the economy, among other issues. So the question we're asking today, should we emulate our neighbors and foster national dialogue? Now, what are some of the issues that we need to discuss in such a process? Who should initiate and chair such an initiative? Now, these and more questions will form part of our discussions this evening, but we value your thoughts, so please do communicate with us on the WhatsApp number 0703-090-090. My two guests this evening, the Honorable Jimmy Akena, Lira City East Division MP, President of the Uganda People's Congress. Good evening, Honorable Jimmy Akena. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Good evening, listeners, and thank you very much for inviting me to be on this show.
It has been quite long.
Quite some time, actually.
And congratulations on the victories that you recorded in your backyard in Lango sub-region in the by-elections.
Yam North and Dokolo. Yes, they were hard fought, but I think it came out quite well. There are certain lessons which came out of that one, which I hope we're going to be able to sort out before we go to the general election. The roles of certain actors were very prominent. You found RDCs playing roles of political cadres. I don't mind if NRM employs their cadres and deploys them in the field, but where you have somebody in a government role taking positions and actually being extremely partisan and being extreme in the course of elections, I think those are some of the things which will need to be addressed prior to 2026.
All right. Of course, there are so many questions that Ugandans keep putting across. I'll put some of them to you during the course of this discussion, because we are going to be talking about national dialogue. Also in studio, Mr. Edgat Tabaharo is an advocate, pundit on governance and regional matters. He's also envoy of Sudan's oldest political party, UMA. Good evening, sir. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening, Anderson. I'm happy to be here with my big brother, James Michael Akena, whom I address him as Jimmy. To me, he's a big brother. We are family friends, and the last time we met was actually on this show, and I feel very shy too that I've not checked on the old woman, the matriarch of the family, in a long time. But Jimmy and my old man are great friends, and they meet regularly. to discuss, to set their own agenda.
Interesting. That is Lango and Kisoro.
Alala, we moved to Toro.
Moved to Toro.
We are,
but originally from Kisoro.
Yeah, we are
Gisoro.
Gisoro. We are now. Well, we are naturalized by Toro. And talking of Gisoro, my old man, son of a peasant, who never in their imaginations would have imagined that he would be a retired judge now after his P6. His school fees were paid state scholarship, thanks to the policy, in part to the policies of the sitting government then, the late Dr. Apolomito Loboti. All through Kigezi College, Butovere, Nyakasura, Makerere University, LDC as a People's State Attorney. And he was able to rise thanks to those policies, the egalitarian policies.
So one can say you are also a product of the UPC policies.
I have fondness for Dr. Bote's policies. I never hide it. And I've been so since I was a teenager. Whichever person it rubs the wrong way, I'm on record on that.
All right. Let's kickstart.
So I'm really happy to be seated with Jimmy.
All right. Let's kickstart this discussion. And I'll begin with you, Honorable Jimmy Akena, because I know you've been part of a process that has tried to discuss our challenges, our governance challenges here through the Elders Forum. I'm sure you are aware of that process, but also iPod. You know, each time we look at what is happening with our neighbors, especially Kenya, people are always sort of, surprised, envious about what is happening in Kenya. Each time there's some sort of a conflict, they resort to dialogue. And some people have actually been saying that is the way to go. But let me take your word on it. Do you think it's necessary to have a national dialogue in our country?
I definitely think so, and I've tried to, in my own part, play a role towards building up that issue of a national dialogue, finding avenues where you could discuss and also take a position which can foster that dialogue. Apart from the Elders Forum, there's also the Women's Situation Room, which got involved, and at least in my part, within the auspices of iPod, I tried to move this thing forward, and we actually had some reasonable discussions. Although iPod seems to have stalled for some time. Largely in this term, there's not been much activity in iPod. But it's important that we do have avenues whereby we can have a release rather than having a reset, which comes out naturally. Like, for example, what has happened in Kenya, this reset has been expensive, both in the form of lives and property and other aspects which have taken place. If you can foster and have a dialogue around these issues before you reach that level of exploding, then it is always better. But this is something which is pending. The pent-up anger exists. I meet so many young people who are struggling for opportunity. There are questions which can be raised that our education system has taught our young people to pass exams. Then next you want them to be entrepreneurs and the like, but they have no experience in that area. They have no training in that particular area. So how do you create a future for them? I think this attempts at this skilling is a little, too little and too late. It's something which needed to be fostered earlier on. Within the education system, some of those skills can be identified quite early. If somebody is, I remember in the past we used to have things like woodwork and technical drawing, and you can identify different skills at an early stage and develop it from there and then take it a stage further, such that when somebody is coming out of school, even if they're ending at primary, they will have a skill which can sustain them. But by and large, we are getting a generation of young people who have tried everything, right? They have passed the exam, they've taken their applications to all offices, they've been all over the place, and they still don't get an opportunity. Now, that is brewing. The composition of Uganda may delay it somewhat because we're not as urbanized as some of, like even Kenya, but it is an anger which is brewing, and if we don't find ways of addressing the actual concerns and the livelihood concerns of the next generation of Ugandans, definitely reach a forefront, and then it's going to come up. And much as they say that this is a tribeless, leaderless, politicalless, but when it does come up, anybody who appears to be on the other side becomes a victim. And I think we've had flares of it, which have come up, and when you find yourself in the middle of it. I remember during the Kayunga riots, some of the issues which were being raised on the street. I was directly involved in Mabira, together with Mama Mabira at that time. And you hear the sentiments of what is being raised by the people on the street. There are things which I didn't expect, but when we got on the street, you can hear a lot of this pent-up anger. So, personally, I feel it is important that we do find ways of addressing the economic concerns, and for me, everything fosters around politics. These are issues which we can deal with on a political forum or through politics, but where political avenues are somewhat limited, definitely we do have these problems building up to a level whereby there will be a reset at some point. Whether you like it, you don't like it, there's going to be a readjustment and a reset. All
right. Let's hear from Edgar. Edgar, your take on national dialogue. Do you think we need it? You heard from your colleague, Honorable Jimmy Akena. His take. Look at Uganda where we are now. Do we need to reflect? Do we need to rethink? Do we need to sit down and talk?
No, we have a saying in my native Kinyarwanda Urufumbira language. Harabantu ntihabura uruntu. Where people interact, you're bound to have disagreements. Whenever a group of people come together to interact, there'll always be some areas of divergence. Now, dialogue, and particularly so for politicians, at all material times should keep avenues open for formal and informal dialogue. Informal and informal avenues for dialoguing. Dialogue builds consensus. Consensus builds harmony. Harmony builds long-lasting and sustainable political stability. So, the call for dialogue is a never-existent one, particularly in democracies like ours that are still fledgling democracies like ours. And I'm choosing my words carefully. I don't want to sound like the extremists on either side of the political divide. It's a fledgling democracy. It is young. It's nascent. It needs to be nurtured. And the only way you can nurture and deepen a democracy is through dialogue. You've drawn examples from Kenya. I think you saw the pictures. Were they of today or yesterday?
Yesterday.
Kalonzo Musyoka, Raila Odinga, from across the political divide, and President Ruto taking the back, not the back seat, but standing behind, and all these people making statements. And I thought that was phenomenal. But we must also understand that Kenya has a more mature democracy. It has a more vibrant civil society. I don't know whether I would call their political parties vibrant, because their political parties are basically special purpose vehicles for purposes of negotiating power, not even attaining. For purposes of negotiating power, whether you're in the majority or
in the minority.
It's always for purposes of negotiating the spoils for state power. Now, Honorable,
maybe you should talk about the mature politicians. Maybe could that be the issue?
You see,
statesmen
mature in what manner? In terms of age, you can be young but mature.
Okay.
You can be young chronologically, by way of chronology, but in the mind, even your approach to things is mature. And we see many politicians who are in advanced age but behaving very maturely.
Okay.
So, Honorable Kenneth lived in Zambia for some time. Zambia, I think 55% of the population is urban. Southern Africa has highly urban populations because of certain structures of their arable land and whatever, and moving to. Now, I see Uganda. When I was growing up in the 90s, attending high school in the 90s, 1994, 95, the 1991 census, only 11.2% of Ugandans were urban. Now it's 29.3. Now, unless and until government comes to address the issues of the young urbanites, believe me, it's a potentially explosive situation. And look at Kampala. Kampala city is basically hemmed in. Kampala, you know, when you talk of Kampala city, it's only 1.8 million people. But there's the greater Kampala, Wakiso, Kira, Mukono, Entebbe. Mpigi. Now, all those adjoining areas, what you'd call greater Kampala and the peri-urban areas. Not necessarily urban, but with a mix of, the rural and urban population. Now, in the coming election, 2026 election, 81% of the eligible voters will be between the age of 18 and 30. From what we have witnessed in Kenya, it's a whole different set of dynamics. Believe me, the Gen Z are in their own world, and we seem not to appreciate. We seem not to appreciate their concerns. We seem not to appreciate their intricacies. We are living in a bubble. Honorable Akena has addressed the aspects of skilling, tooling, but also when it comes to job, we are emphasizing. We are erecting industrial parks, and it's become a buzzword. Industrial parks, number of the
agro-based industries.
But there's an aspect that we are leaving out that would readily absorb multitudes and hordes of youth in the employment and entrepreneurship. Cottage industry. Cottage industry is what basically made India. And cottage industry does not need heavy capital outlay.
One would say that we are now in a different generation. Probably you can't be talking about cottages. People are talking more about technology, innovations.
Yes, but not all can be. When you're talking of you're talking about AI, artificial intelligence, the fourth industrial and fifth industrial revolution, the AI, robotics, and what have you. But there'll always be that the certain aspects of the economy that have to have that primary production. You must convert cereal into some value add. You have to pack it. You have to add fortification of foods. And this can best happen in small in joakalis, so to say. So it's going to significantly affect the way you look at things. So our politicians have no choice but to dialogue. If they don't dialogue, persons in my space, persons in our space, will have to push for the dialogue. We'll have to push them to dialogue, whether they want it or not. Because for dialogue, we'll build sustainable harmony. Dialogue will build consensus. And it has always been the clarion call, right from the time Dr. Bote formed when he broke away from the Uganda National Congress to join UPU of Retsiva and Chiwanuka, Jolly Joe Chiwanuka. As we headed for independence, there were two commissions that the British government put in place. There was the World Committee and the Master Committee to prepare Uganda, the Uganda Relations whatever report, to prepare Uganda for independence. Even immediately after independence, there are certain things they put in place for dialogue. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. People tore in different directions, but over the years there have been many reports, public inquiries, that all we needed to do is to dust them, put them before these party leaders of ours and other civic and other co-opted persons, and form the basis for dialoguing.
All over Akena, you did say that there have been attempts. The question then is, why are our political leaders, not looking at dialogue as an option to address some of these issues? Because you all want a better country, and when people are well served, you get re-elected, you get the people's mandate, people are happy, you can even rule for life. Why is dialogue not an option?
But Kenneth, you're speaking to somebody who went out of his way, bent backwards to foster the dialogue. To get IPO to where it reached, I mentioned quite openly in several occasions that even if it meant just going for a cup of tea, I'm prepared to go for that cup of tea. Because if you can share a cup of tea, you can have some conversation over that cup of tea. And next time when there's a more serious issue, if you have a bit of rapport, it is easier to build on that one. But if you are completely hostile, that you are not able to meet in any circumstance, or you're not able to discuss anything, and you only want to discuss something which is going to be very serious in nature, it is hard. Some of these issues must start on small talk. And that is where I started from, on the issue of opening things up. And then I looked for issues which were mutually beneficial for all the political parties. That is what formed the basis on where we reached some level of progress within IPOD, where we could tackle issues which were mutually acceptable. But also the whole nature of IPOD is basically all parties have veto. So you cannot defeat anyone within the IPOD context. What can go through IPOD is something which is going to be mutually acceptable across the board. Now, on these key national issues, as you mentioned in Kenya, it comes to a point that looking at the good of the country, all these leaders were willing to step up and say, Kenya is greater than all our needs and our differences. Let us find ways of forging together.
How about us here?
Now, us here, so far, I've not seen it come to that point, because even when I was pursuing the issue of dialogue within IPOD, I had a lot of accusations against myself, a lot of things which was mentioned, but I thought it better that if we could have some level of dialogue, which we were able to have to some extent, it could cool down some of the temperatures, animosity and suspicions across the board. But we have to do a lot more.
We were actually told it in those kinds of meetings, the person convening, the president, just dictates to the leaders there. Is there anything tangible that you can talk about that came out of the round of talks that you had?
That is not the case, because what you can discuss at the summit goes through the council first, and the council is headed by the Secretary Generals. And there are serious discussions which were held. Some were not concluded. There's a lot of discussion raised against the Public Order Management Act, especially under the leadership of the FDC when they were in the chair. So at the council level, FDC were very ready to participate, but they're not ready to participate at a summit level. So you take things to a certain point, but you cannot conclude them because they concluded the summit. There were areas where, through the argument, through the discussion, it was realized that some of the provisions of Public Order Management Act were not sustainable, were not conducive in a democratic state. But we couldn't conclude on that one because of some of those matters were not able to conclude on. But the courts later
did strike down.
But I would actually put it here on record that when we were holding our first summit, we were able to coalesce, that is all the other parties outside of NRM, and we had a meeting. The meeting was in Mao's home, and the concerns of FDC were ably tabled by Asman Basalirwa. Without mincing words, it was put straightforward there. So in the discussion, in the closed discussion, it was actually very frank. But when we came to the public, people are talking to the gallery. You were keeping your constituency happy, you will talk tough, you whatever. But in the summit, where it was leaders with the Secretary Generals and the team from NIMT, it was frank, it was honest, it was open. So the discussions were, I would say, quite conducive. But of course, you have your constituencies, all our constituencies. You do not want to come and appear to your constituency that you have collapsed or shifted posts. So more needs to be done. But the point which is coming up, or the point around the Gen Z, in Uganda, I think we're in a worse situation. I've lived in Kenya, I've seen a lot of what takes place in Kenya. Kenya have expanded on many of the institutions which give these young people skills. And to borrow on what Edgar mentioned earlier, even if you look at what were called the Asian Tigers, if you look at their progress for them when they shot up, especially in the IT sector, there was a lot of training which was done, a lot of skills which are given to the young people. And then a lot of it turned out in the cottage industries, because people are trained in IT, but you had now the components. So somebody could sit in his garage, get all these various components put together and come up with with something which is very useful. Can take a computer, can upgrade it to do other skills and whatever. So the training aspect and giving them the right skills and in the environment where they can utilize those skills took place. So cottage industry, not just the traditional cottage industry where you're going to be making something or whatever, but for the Asian tigers, a lot of it went towards the IT sector. And that's when the Far East took over as far as IT is concerned. They took over because they first invested in their people.
There was a framework.
The training and giving them the tools.
They were intentional and purposeful.
The tools to do so. Now, in the case of Uganda, I actually get very scared because many of the institutions which should support, when you look at a professional level, you need roughly, across board, you need roughly 10 diploma certificate holders to make that professional successful. If you have your doctor, you need the nurses, you need the lab technicians, you need the pharmacy technicians, you need a whole lot of skills people who are diploma and certificate holders to help that doctor become very effective. And the same goes to engineering, all of these various fields. In the case of Uganda, we were cannibalizing those institutions which were giving those skills and turning them into universities. Now, even if you set up a factory today, who is going to be on the factory floor? On the factory floor is normally the diploma certificate holders in whatever field. If it is IT, there'll be those ones with those skills, whatever it is. Now, we talk about industry. Yes, you talk about, we were setting up industry, we set up industrial parks. But now you've set up a park. Who are going to be employed? Uganda has the top skill level and then the unskilled labor. What we don't have the deliberate program to give our young people the right knowledge and skills to be effective in this environment.
All right.
And that's where the frustration will come.
All right. Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90. We need to go for a break now. When we return, we'll continue reflecting on some of the key issues that need to actually be tackled through the national dialogue. I'm speaking to the Honorable Jimmy Akena, leader, City East Division MP, President of the Uganda People's Congress, Mr. Edgat Tabaharo, Advocate Pandit on Governance and Regional Matters, Envoy of Sudan's oldest political party, UMA. Stay tuned to Radio 1 FM 90. We'll continue after this break. Well, thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum, live on Radio 1 FM 90. My name is Kenneth, Lukwago, your host. Today we are looking at the persistent calls for national dialogue, lessons from Kenya and Tanzania. My guest, the Honorable Jimmy Akena, leader, City East Division MP, President of the Uganda People's Congress, Mr. Edgat Tabaharo, Advocate Pandit on Governance and Regional Matters, Envoy of Sudan's oldest party, UMA. Now, Edgat, let me come to you. Honorable Akena talks about, gives us a sneak peek of what actually has been happening in those organized meetings when they attempted to do dialogue. Talks about people speaking genuinely inside, and then they get out, they say completely different things. And then the level of mistrust also, and not agreeing on actually what should be on the agenda. There seem to have been issues. Most cases we have heard about the opposition who have insisted that they want the issue of political transition discussed, and some have even said they wouldn't want to see President Yoweri Museveni on the next ballot. He should go and retire, rest, and guide the country as an advisor. What's your take about the way our political class is actually responding to this issue of national dialogue?
What political class?
Well, we have set of leaders. We have people who are in government, but we also have people who are in the opposition, like the Honorable Jimmy Akena.
The biggest challenge we have is what agenda and what agenda are we pushing? Are we dialoguing for the sake of dialoguing, or there's engaging in dialogue, but there's also being dialogued. Being dialogued. It could be that they are dialoguing not out of necessity, but to posture, to posture and get and involve in jingoism, political jingoism to please certain sections and constituencies.
The calls for dialogue are always sounded, especially after the election.
Exactly. And sometimes
I've had some people actually saying it works for the government because it cools down the temperature.
Yeah, that's what I said. Dialogue builds consensus, and if it can be used to cool down temperatures, so much the better. But also, we shouldn't engage in dialogue for the sake of it. What is the agenda? What are the biggest challenges that we have as a country? Yes. You're talking of transition. Transition from what to what? Transition in what area? When Kenya, if we should borrow from Kenya, because you've quoted Kenya very heavily, it is militated in your discourse. They've had many transitions. They've had many transitions. Even
the one that people compare so much to Uganda is the one of Moi.
From Moi
to Kibaki.
Yes. But you see, there were also other less pronounced transitions.
That's when people say there were talks, and Moi was even given a golden jacket, so they say.
There were those are the things that happened behind the scenes. The informal avenues of dialogue. Honorable Akena has his family partly lived in Kenya, and they certainly witnessed, particularly their family friend Nyiva Mwendo. She was part of those dialogues. Actually, talking of the Mwenda family, it was a very critical family in dialoguing in the 70s. Kenya, first of all, the transition to self-rule, self-governance and independence. It was all through dialogue. After, obviously, heavy rebellion from Mau Mau, the Kapenguria trials, then the merging of KADU to form KAU and KADU. Jaramogi Odinga Oginga didn't come on board by accident. It was through dialogue, and Kenya is overly ethnicized politics here. We try to hide it, but nevertheless, you see, as well, ethnicity being a big issue there. But a coalition of those small ethnic groupings with the big ones, Kalenjin, then Luo. Jema, that's Gikuyu, Embu, Meru, and Embu. Then you had the what was it called, the Kamba, the Eastern Province, and the ones from the coast. Through dialogue. Then it's 1969, it collapses. Jaramogi Odinga leaves. He resigns suddenly from government. Kenyatta goes to Kisumu. The riots. The allegations that Kenyatta got out and actually held a revolver and and participated in quelling the riots. Then even Moi's ascendancy to the presidency. It was the late what was it? Charles Njonjo, Mugane Njonjo, who negotiated his rise to the presidency. Because there was a change constitution movement led by hardcore Kikuyus who thought that the state power belonged to them and it couldn't pass on to any other person.
So if those kinds of discussions did happen in Kenya, why can't they happen here?
The question is, with what agenda? For what purpose? Is it just for the purpose of dialoguing? There's a greater country, there's a greater construct called Republic of Uganda. What is it that we need in place for Uganda to continue existing and thriving as a nation? Uganda was there before I and Honorable Akena. I believe there will be a Uganda after us. But we can only guarantee that there will be a Uganda after us if we make conscious, purposeful and intentional decisions in our body politic to guarantee the survival of Uganda. And how do we guarantee the survival of Uganda? A Uganda that is responsive to the aspirations and needs of its people. The majority of our people are young people. We have to listen to them. We shouldn't wait for matters to reach boiling point. We need to give a voice to these young people. We need to skill them. We need to tool them. We need to make them, not only should they feel, they should be made to see that Uganda can work for us all. And some of the things we need to work on in the dialogue is stemming impunity. Believe me, in this country, if and when we make conscious attempts, purposeful and intentional steps at addressing impunity, much of the malaise that we suffer in Uganda will start being addressed seriously.
Well, you're a lawyer. There are some people actually saying that one of the things that needs to be addressed is taking back the country on the road of constitutionalism and the rule of law. Some people actually say things are not going the right way. Isn't that an issue that can be on the agenda?
And that's what I'm talking about precisely. Addressing and tackling impunity head on. Impunity is simply doing wrong things, knowing that nothing will happen to you. And addressing the rule of law is basically talking about doing away with impunity or checking impunity. So
right.
I agree with you.
All right.
Rule of the law, and not rule by the law. Rule of the law, not rule. You can rule by law, which is unconstitutional in itself, which can be unconstitutional as well. We're talking rule of the law. Processes, things, aspects like fundamental human rights, those should never come up for negotiation. I've heard in the latest discourse that is happening that they do away with issues like, they do away with some fundamental freedoms like, right to be held, bail. That is so critical in deepening democracy and deepening rule of the law. So, and these matters, the political side, the divide of the political side you belong, they don't know ethnicity. You saw how Honorable Akamba was picked. Honorable Akamba was picked.
Around court.
Anywhere, I mean, from court premises. It was very shabby. And, there's been back and forth talk that these things always happen to the opposition and nobody talks, and now they're happening to members of the whatever. So there are certain things that we shouldn't negotiate.
All right.
And one of the matters should be impunity. Impunity should be addressed.
Right. Honorable Akena, when you talk about young people, of course, you might have heard people actually saying that, it's time to give the reins to the young people, and hence the calls for transition, because the young people who are so many actually think they are old enough to now become the leaders.
I don't have a difficulty with young people aspiring for positions of leadership, and I encourage young people to rise up. So it is not per se, but in many cases you find young people saying that when you reach even a relative young age, speaking that you should retire so that you create opportunities for others. Now, the whole issue which I've been trying to emphasize is that we need to create the opportunities for all, right? We need to look at things holistically and create those opportunities for people to be able to thrive. So how do we harness the energies of the young people? How do we give them the necessary skills? It needs a lot of planning, and these are issues which are political in nature in the debate which we should be having. But very often in our politics, our debate does not center around the issues, the policies on what we want or where we see Uganda going. So it is easier to turn around and to start knocking people's heads than trying to listen to what is being raised. And I'm hoping that as we go into 2026, we're going to have a more deep discussion on how we can address some of these problems, how we can preempt some of these issues. Because a lot of the young people, as I mentioned earlier on, a lot of the young people have not been given the necessary knowledge and skills to be effective in the changing environment. So things have changed. Earlier on, through the strength of the cooperatives, we had ways of at least putting some money in the rural economy where people are able to educate their children and give their children opportunities to be able to go further. There's been some sort of breakdown. There are those who are stuck in the rural area who are not going to come out. Like Edgar mentioned that his father was a brilliant young person with no political connection, but he had the brains.
Nothing like for 7 political connections.
What was the system in place was, how do we get the best brains of Uganda and give them the skills where they can be effective in helping Uganda. Now, we have skilled or brilliant people in all sorts of places, but the system in place, does it give them opportunities to rise? Are we giving opportunities to our best in various aspects? It is now becoming more of where you are or how you're situated that you're going to give your children opportunities. But we still need to look at, for me personally, the greatest asset Uganda has is its people. And all of these issues, when you talk about the economy, GDP and what, we should not be working for GDP. The GDP should be working for the people of Uganda. So if the GDP is whatever figure, but it does not reflect in the quality of life of the citizens, for me, it's a complete failure. And that's the conversation which I want to have going towards 2026. How are we going to address these problems? How are we going to create a future where everybody is valued? The issue of how you mentioned how Akamba was arrested. It's not, for me, you should not be doing that one, because knowing where Akamba is, it's not difficult. And the process of, in many parliaments, you serve
the Speaker's office?
Yes.
And the Speaker tells the member to report to the police?
Yes, and it is done in a civil way. And we also have internal security within Parliament who can assist where police find it difficult. But
you have an entire department now at Parliament.
Yes, but now you start grabbing a member of Parliament who is a leader with a lot of support in his particular area. You grab him like a chicken thief. What message are you sending to the rest of society? Right? So you don't disrespect somebody in the open and then you expect things to be good. Now, members of Parliament are leaders. So you must treat them as leaders. The same way in many cases where the military treat their senior officers in a particular way. When you arrest a senior officer, you don't arrest like a chicken thief. And often when they hold them in different places, sometimes they're held in an officer's mess and not treated like some criminal. We need to have some better etiquette on how we manage these issues.
All right. We have feedback coming in from the listeners, so I'll read out some of the comments. We have Henry Kiwenda, who writes in and says, Kenneth, good evening. Now there is a word in Kenya, Kiswahili, known as katiba, which means constitution. Now a katiba mold defines the shape of actions of people, court, school, etc. That's where Ugandans go wrong in comparing Kenyan courts to Ugandan courts, where we do not have a katiba or where we do not have a katiba, so our actions are not predictable. So he's talking about constitutionalism. Do we have a constitution in Uganda, or we need to have a discussion around it? We have a comment coming in from Fred. Do you think skills can be taught to young people in schools, especially at primary level? Rather, why don't we think about informal skilling in homes by parents and agriculture extension agents at parent farms in addition to what schools can offer? We dialogue when two strong parties fight and we fail to get a winner. A weak person can dialogue with a strong one. If government sorts service delivery, creates opportunities for work and fights corruption, that will be the dialogue talk that we need. Leaders, let the leaders deliver on that. We have a comment coming in from David. If you're talking about dialogue, can Honorable Jimmy Akena tell us how he has deployed such a strategy within UPC party itself? Then we have another comment from Anthony. Good evening, Spectrum. Why do we want to copy from what happens elsewhere? Do we have the same capacity like those countries? National dialogue is the best way to go fast. Let's drop our differences and bring out our best knowledge and ideas to build our country so that we can reach there someday. Then we have a comment from Benon Fetri Namasko. Everyone is hyping AI and 4IR. And robots, but forget that all these are implemented by humans who will be employed. When the computer came up, folks thought people were going to lose jobs. Now we have people earning a living as social media influencers. Robots are built and programmed by people. All we need is to be in the right time at the right place. Formal education is the first step. AI can follow. Thank you for the show. Then we have another comment here. Live streaming from Ethiopia. Thank you very much for tuning in. National dialogue was needed yesterday, but let us understand that we are in a military government, and in a military, there are no negotiations. In Uganda also, we want to politicize everything. Negotiations should involve compromises. Most of our politicians live in a bubble. Lastly, we have a comment coming in from Pat. Radio 1, thank you for the program. Kenya's modern-day dialogues have been after the strongman Arap Moi. In Uganda, the strongman has an agenda that seems to exclude meaningful dialogue, because then his agenda from the bush through Nairobi peace talks and with no apparent intention to hand over power to his son. With now apparent intentions to hand over power to his son. Dialogue might appear an inconvenience to him. That's a comment coming in from Pat there. For a quick response to some of these comments that have come out, Honorable Jimmy Akena and Mr. Edgat Tabaharo, we'll begin with you, Honorable Akena.
Now, on the question of what skills should you give in primary, if you know that more than half of those who are going to enroll in P1 are not going to go beyond P7, what skills are you giving them? Because they're now going to retreat back into the society which they came from. If you can do some of that skilling, agriculture used to be part of the syllabus. If you can improve on what that child will be able to do within, and of course the land fragmentation is becoming more as population increases. So if the forefather had acres and then this one has a smaller acre, that person will have to be able to earn a living from a smaller bit of land. So whatever skills you can give, knowing that more than half of the children who are going to roll in P1 are not going to go beyond P7, it's important that we give those skills there. Instead of giving them a formal education which is limited but does not have life skills beyond that one, because they're not going to go. And many of the young people will drop out at different stages. So whatever skills we are able to pass on them, which will be able to sustain them, is useful. Now, certain interests, I come from an understanding that there's not really per se a dull child, but sometimes you have to go a bit further to be able to tap into the interests of the child in question. And that is where I have serious difficulties on this issue of saying we must emphasize science and forget arts. There are some kids who are brilliant in arts. We may have the next Okot Bitek, but you're now saying, no, you're not going to support arts, so the teachers are going to be frustrated. And then in many areas, you still need, the scientists can develop the technology of how you can whatever, but then it's the artist who's going to use it, whether it is TikTok, television, or whatever. You need a blend of both. So we need to tap into the skills. Whatever skills they are, we need to enhance them, develop them. So we need to be able to tap from the young age, because many are not going to go through the whole formality. So if you're not going to do it, what skills are you giving? If you give enough skills for somebody who's going to earn a living and raise a family, that is better than just giving them a half-baked education, which is not going to be useful to them in any way.
All right. Would you want to respond to somebody who talked about dialogue within the UPC?
I don't have a problem with dialogue in the UPC.
Because we are told you have factions now. You have some people also claiming to be leaders of the party.
UPC has always had factions right from the
beginning. If you listen to Edgar in the beginning, under UNC, there was a point where there were 3 UNCs. And even when UNC merged with UPU, there's still UNC which went into elections. in 61. Yeah. And they got 1 seat in 61, but then in 62 they were not there. So the strength of the factions is important in politics. When you're talking and you have nothing behind you, you should also know you have nothing behind you. So talking is not a problem. I go back to what Edgar is. Are you talking for the sake of talking, or on the sake of how we're going to build the party? And I keep urging many of these people that some of these quarrels which we're having, let us strengthen the party where we have relevance or opportunity to do so. So I'd rather, if somebody says I'm a leader of UPC and you have a constituency or a lot of support on the ground, then there we are at par. But if you're only a leader when you're speaking to Kenneth Anderson Lukwago on Radio 1, then your dialogue will remain on Radio 1. It's not going to get to the grassroots.
We have a comment here from Jessica who says UPC is in government. They shouldn't be complaining.
No.
Honorable Jimmy Akena, are you in government? Are you in what do we call cooperation? What kind of
we have been engaging. This is part of the issue of trying to de-escalate and try to find ways of how we can forge a way forward. But in every election, I've competed against NRM. If you saw the recent by-elections where we got through in Oyam North, there was a serious battle.
People were surprised.
There was a serious battle in Dokolo. There was a battle.
Why is there a rivalry between UPC and NRM? But
in every election, there's been nothing. There's no talk about elections that we're on the same page. Every election we have fought. Every seat we have has not been given. We have fought for it, we have struggled for it, and that's how we get it. Now, if somebody thinks that you just sit back and then you'll be somewhere, no. We have fought for those seats and we're fighting for more seats. Come 2026, we're going to be in a much stronger position.
We have actually heard that there could be some sort of an agreement between you and President Yoweri Museveni. You don't run for president, but you can field candidates in other positions. Could that be the issue? Is that the issue?
That has not been the issue.
Let's hear his candidates.
That is not the issue. As far as with the party support, I intend to be in the ballot on 2026.
All right. Let's hear from you, Edgar, as we come to the end of this show. Your responses to some of the points that have been put across.
Just quickly to supplement on what the Honorable Akena has said. The biggest earners in the United States are music, film, and technology, tech, apps, digital coding. Now, these, the 3, they all need scientists. but they as well need what?
Artists.
So you don't, for an economy to earn, you don't have to emphasize the aspect of artists. Yeah? And with the increased artificial intelligence, some of the programs that were performed purely by scientists can now even be performed by persons who don't have a background in science. You can actually, Anderson Lukwago, you can go and carry out intensive farming on your 4-acre piece of land, integrating, animal farming, crop and animal husbandry, even generating your own electricity. We've seen, there's many of these, much of this content you see coming out of South America, Southeast Asia, and even Kenya. So with AI, we'll be having many more people who will be absorbed, who can be absorbed in the monetary economy. Only if we equip the people, one, with the skills. Two, we must make these affordable. Internet should be affordable. There's what they call digitalization and digitization. They are the major drivers of the things. It should be made affordable in terms of access in terms of being able to raise the finances. Two, to address those who are impaired visually or any other what do they call it? Impairments. They should be made available. This is what the young people are pushing for. The young people are not necessarily looking for titles like, you like to call me counsel, you like to call me honor. These are not the titles they are looking for. They want to pursue their passions, and they want their passions to meet, to have a meeting point, a convergence with uplifting their livelihoods. So, in all that we say, we ought, if we are to build a Uganda
that we want,
the Uganda that works for us all. The Uganda I want may not be necessarily the one that I want, but the Uganda that works for us all. Regardless of your political and ethnic divide, there are certain things we must put in place. We must address that aspect of livelihoods of the young people. Two, we must address the aspect of impunity by deepening rule of the law, not rule by the law.
All right. I must thank you, my dear panelists, for actually making time to be with us this evening. Thank you very much, Honorable Jimmy Akena. Thank you very much, Mr. Edgat Tabaharo. And thank you